Good afternoon, everyone. This is Rebecca Gill, and today I am joined with Pat Ramsey, who is the Director of Technology at CrowdFavorite. I just would like to welcome all of you to the webinar on this fine Friday, and I wanted to apologize for the shift in days and timing. I had to travel this week, and it was completely unavoidable, so I had to move us from Wednesday to Friday and hopefully go to meeting or go to webinar, quickly communicated that out to everybody so you could adjust your schedules. There will be a recording of this webinar going out to everyone in email, both those who attend and those who don't attend. It should arrive about an hour after we complete, so about 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. In the GoToWebinar control panel that you have, there will be a link to Pat's slides in PDF. So those are available for you to grab at any time. And we will allow for some questions and answers at the end of this presentation. So if you have any questions that you would like Pat to answer for you, please just go ahead and drop them in the questions box, which is on your your GoToWebinar control panel. What I'll do is I'll just collect them there, and then when Pat's through with everything, we'll just go through them one by one. And if you've got new questions at that time, we'll answer them as well. So with that all said, I would like to hand control and the microphone over to Pat and welcome him on. Pat, thanks so much for coming and joining us today and educating us all on performance and optimization.
Cool. Thank you, Rebecca. Good Friday, everyone. I hope that your week has been fun and productive and that your day is doing the same. I'm looking forward to hearing what your questions are from this, and because I know this is always a topic that comes up. So first off, a little bit about me and who I am. As Rebecca said, I'm Director of Technology at CrowdFavorite. We're an agency that tends to work in the enterprise space and large business space, doing integrations and custom websites for all kinds of businesses. My first website was 1995, and so I'm one of the gray hairs out here who's been working with this for some time. As far as WordPress goes, which we all know is the most widely used CMS at this point on the web, I've been working with that since 2004. And I've spanned all sorts of sectors of the space: higher education, small business, publishing, government, enterprise. So little of this, little of that over my time working with this stuff. And I'm still having fun, and we're always still learning. So that's always what we want to do. Some of the sites that I've had the pleasure of working with include some of the titles you see here. What is interesting in working with websites of all sizes and spaces is you realize how much is exactly the same. Everybody still wants their pages to load fast. Everybody still wants to know why certain things can't be done. And everybody always wants things to just work. And so that doesn't change whether you're a small shop, mom and pop, freelancer, enterprise, or whatever. So it's really interesting to see that. What everybody wants is their website to perform well. You want your pages to load quickly. You just want it to work the way you think it should work, and you want it to get that message across so that you grow your viewership and you get more things done, more things sold, more eyes on your content. So when we talk about website performance, you can almost boil it down to two sort of large bucket questions, large bucket areas. How long does it take for pages to load? So when I click on a link, how much time am I waiting to see everything that I should see? And how much load does a page put on the server? That one's less obvious to your viewers, but it impacts your viewers because it impacts how long it takes for pages to load. Those two areas are where you can tend to make the most gains when you get into improving your website performance. And so what we're looking at today is going to concentrate largely in these two buckets. Now, why is this important? Why can't you just build your pages? Put your pictures out there, put your videos on there, put your PDFs, whatever you're doing. Why can't you just do that? Well, it's important because speed affects your Google search rankings. Now, I know there's Bing and there's other search engines out there, but Google is pretty much the industry leader in this space. If people are searching, 9 times out of 10, they're searching Google. Google is trying to raise the bar on everybody who's running websites to make them better, to make them faster, to make them load quicker. And so instead of just looking at the content of your pages, they're also looking at how hard it is for people to see your pages. So if your pages are slower, you might be seeing a dip in your search results. I believe it's as of this July, Google has page speed as a factor in search rankings for both desktop and mobile search results. Given the pervasiveness of mobile browsing around the world, that's a very important thing to pay attention to. Faster page loads also equal happier users. There was a study done a few years ago by Ericsson, and what they discovered was in instances where people are waiting a long time for pages to load for that content that they're expecting to be on the page, people get stressed out. And stressed out people aren't happy people, and they're not happy users, and they're not going to have that association of a pleasant experience with your page or your site if your site is loading slow. Faster page loads also impact conversions. This basically boils down to more sales. If you're selling online and your pages load slow, you're not selling as much. So all of this is fairly important. This quote relates to the Google search rankings change. So, you definitely know now that this is a big thing. There are tools out there that will help you do this. And in this presentation, we're going to look at that. Now, I said that the stress was present when people were there. What they studied, if you look at this quote, is that the stress was equal to that of taking a math test. That right there made me tense and stressed out. Watching a horror movie, or greater than the stress experienced by standing at the edge of a virtual cliff. So let's not make our website visitors stressed out. Let's improve our page load times. We want happy users. On the conversion side of this, there's actual numbers to this. This isn't just sort of a guess or somebody, putting their finger to the wind. In-post mobile conversion rates. Pages that loaded in 2.4 seconds had a conversion rate of 1.9%. Pages that took slightly less than double that, 4.2 seconds, had a conversion rate below 1%. Firefox put some analytics in place when they were looking at their downloads for the Firefox browser, and when they reduced page load times by 2.2 seconds, there was a 15% increase in downloads. This is significant information. So the reason these companies are putting so much emphasis on speed and performance is because it has a direct result with sales and improved conversions. The research has shown that this magic number of how fast we want our pages to load has been for some time now sitting around the 2.5 second time frame. 250 milliseconds is what that equals to. When you start measuring this stuff, you're measuring it, in milliseconds as well as seconds. So you're talking 2.5 seconds. That's everything on your page to load. You're talking your video, your sliders, your images, fancy backgrounds, your forms, your menus, all of that. You're looking at 2.5 seconds. That's not a long time. So for those of you who are fighting the fight to get your pages to load better, and maybe you have some resistance on the other end of your offices, just start a timer and look and see how long it takes, that page to load that somebody in your department wants every single thing to be on. If it's not loading in that much time, then that's when the conversations start to happen. So where do we start? How do we get going on this? The first thing is to really sit back, look at everything that's loading in your pages. Do you know how much is in there? We know pages, generally you're talking about HTML. You're looking at images most of the time. You're talking about video in a lot of today's pages. Video is key. Video is important. So we're going to load video because people want it. You're looking at your fonts. People want fancy fonts. People want fonts that look good for the screen. Or you have your corporate fonts, your identity. You're going to load fonts. You have your CSS, which is all of your styles. You want stuff to look good. You want things to look right. So you have to have your styles in place. And pretty much along with HTML and CSS, you're going to have JavaScript. This is not just the tracking scripts for things like Google Analytics, but it's the JavaScript that controls how things load, how things behave, your sliders, things like that. All of that stuff's going to come in there. Behind the scenes, because we're talking about CMSs, we're looking at queries to the database. If you're talking about WordPress, if you're talking about Drupal, if you're talking about Sitecore, if you're looking at any sort of content management system powering your website, you're talking about queries to some kind of database. The content that you save, most of the time, it's going to sit in a database. So when that page is called, it's going to pull that information out of the database. How efficient is that? Does it have to make a bunch of trips to get all your content? You've got all of the links to those scripts. So every time somebody says, let's add another tracking script, let's add a web font, let's change our web font, let's use Google fonts. All of these things are scripts. Every script that you add is another link that the page has to pull content from in order to render the page. Fonts are included in that. Style sheets are included in that. Video, is it remote video? How many videos do you have on a page? Are they all sitting in your system? Are they all sitting in YouTube? Are they in multiple places? These are videos. They're getting called. They're showing the previews. They're showing the player. Iframes, these are still a thing. If you are embedding some sort of Google Map, some mapping tools, some sort of location piece, some sort of search locator, box that your company has sitting on another system. These are all links. There's a lot of things that go into our web pages today. If not done right, you're talking about a lot of things loading and a lot of time that your pages are spending. This is where the question of how many requests are being made come into play. In other words, how many times does a person's browser have to make a request to a web server to get something to make that page load? So all of those external files, those are the fonts, the videos, the style sheets. If your page has lazy loads or infinite scrolls, then there's a whole nother set of requests that comes into play. That's the dynamic content. Conversely, if you have a dynamic site, how many times is the web server requesting something from a database? So you have dynamic pricing. This is, on the e-commerce side, this can be a common thing. Based on a cookie that somebody has, you might show them a slightly different price, or you might be A/B testing pricing. That's a dynamic update that's made when the page is loaded. You might be dynamically assembling content for a page. So if you are filtering the content that appears on the page, it's grabbing all that content out of the database to show it the first time. A person changes the filters for the page, now it grabs it all again and displays it. Or if you've got your shopping carts, you're calculating shopping cart content. This, for one person or one shopper, is probably not a big deal. If it's Black Friday and you got a lot of people coming to your site, this might be hammering your database and making it not happy at all. So there's a lot of aspects to performance, a lot of things that you want to look at as far as how much content is loading and how many requests are being made. But you're essentially talking about how many requests are being made. How much does my browser have to hit the web server to grab content in order for me just to see the web page? So this is not at all an uncommon position. Just tell me what I have to do. Tell me what I'm looking for. I just want to make it faster. not a problem. It starts with testing. So if you have access to something like New Relic through your web host, New Relic can give you a lot of information. You can build in-house tools that analyze the server logs, or performance reports. You can also run regular tests using browser tools or third-party testing sites. All of these work fine. There's really not a magic bullet to this. It's a question of just, can I find out what's going into my web pages, and then can I, once I see that, am I seeing where I can make some changes? So it just starts with that. Okay, if we talk about probably the easiest thing to get you to get started with this, we're talking about our browser tools. All of our major web browsers have very powerful tools that give us a lot of insight into what's going on. The quote in here, right-click, inspect element, that's kind of what we're talking about here. I can open a browser and pull up a page. If I'm in Firefox or Chrome, probably the two biggest ones, I can right-click on any part of the page, say inspect element, and it's going to show me all kinds of information. We're talking about the HTML of the page. We can see the CSS that's coming in, the scripts that are coming in. I can look at a waterfall of how many things are loading into the page. Mobile emulation. So now I can really look at my content without having to have a library of mobile devices in front of me. You've also got some very powerful hosted solutions, GTmetrix, webpagetest.org, Pingdom. We'll look at all of these to some degree in a second in our demonstration time, but this is just sort of a sampling of a great way to get started. Oops. One of the newer ones that's out there through Chrome is Google's Lighthouse. Lighthouse audits are a newer testing suite of tools, and it's fairly open source. You can grab it and download it on your own as a testing library. It runs in all of the current versions of Chrome, so you don't have to actually install anything. You need Chrome running, and then you can get access to it. What I love about it is you can see in the screenshot, it breaks down a lot of the data in fairly digestible chunks that are pretty clear as to what is going on. It gives you data. It doesn't just give you a score. And it gives you the ability to save your reports, download them as files that you can send over to anybody else in your team, and they can open them up in Chrome and see the reports, go into it, and actually act on it without much work. And that brings us to actually looking at some of this. So I am going to switch over here. And what I have here is just a basic WordPress website. I'm in Chrome. I've got a page with some images. And what I want to do is just see how much this page takes to load. So if I right-click and inspect, I get my inspector down here with all these tabs. The one we're looking at is the audits. So within this, I can look like I'm testing in mobile. I can look like I'm testing in desktop. There are more than just performance audits in here, but performance is the one I'm concerned with. If I want to simulate a mobile connection, I can do that. And then I can just hit the run button. So we're just doing a straight desktop test without any sort of mobile throttling. And it's giving me my progress. It reloaded the page. And then in just a second, we're going to see what the scoring on this looks like and what it tells us about it. Okay, so this is giving me a 97, which if I'm getting 97s on my pages, I'm very happy. Why is it 97? Well, I'm getting my time here, my first contentful paint, my speed index, my time to interactive. This is sort of the breakdown of what's happening here. Contentful paint is when you first start to see content show up. It's at 1.7 milliseconds. Meaningful page means when can I, as a user, start to really get the content and the purpose of the page. I'm at 2.1 seconds. CPU idle means we've loaded just about everything on here and we're, for all practical purposes, done. So it's 2.6 seconds. That's a little over the 2.5 benchmark, but 0.1 second over for this level of site, I'm not really worried about. What I would be concerned with if I saw these values get really, really high, and then there would be a lot more information down here. As I scroll down, I do have sort of a trace of how things load, so I get a little bit of a visual information here. But the opportunities, this is where it starts to give me tips and ideas and identify areas that I could make some improvements on. Eliminating render blocking resources is the top one. So if I click the little arrow, it kind of gives me what that is. This is essentially telling me I'm loading all of these files, and these have to load before the page can really start to draw on the screen. In other words, the page is waiting for all of these things to load. So what am I getting in here? I'm getting CSS files, a lot of CSS files. I could improve this if I wanted to. I could come in and I could figure out a way to combine, to smush, to get rid of if I don't need, to change a lot of this. I have some JavaScript files here, but only 2. That's not bad. I don't have a lot of JavaScript slowing me up. And here's some additional CSS. What else do I have here? Keep server response times low, time to first byte. This is in a lot of ways affected by how many of these files have to load before the page can begin to draw. This can also be something my web host might be able to improve for me, and that would take me working with them. But you'll see other things in here too. It's going to look for properly sized images. Am I taking an image that's the size of a tabletop and displaying it in a small window? If I am, I'm going to be getting dinged here. If my images are properly cropped, I'm not going to see much of an impact here. Avoiding costly round trips to any origin. I could maybe save a little bit of time here by switching to HTTPS instead of HTTP, or making sure that my links are HTTPS and my site is loading from HTTPS. In other words, it's not loading from both. What else? Serve images in next-gen format. There are newer versions of JPEG and newer image formats that you could look at using, which give you better compression. In other words, the images load in less time, they're smaller size, but your quality is still good. This is an area you want to do a little bit of research on, because if you have visitors on older browsers or older versions of browsers, bleeding edge may be a hindrance for you. So it just takes a little bit of research and a little bit of investigation to see if this is something that makes an impact for you. Okay, if I wanted to, I could download my report using the little link here, and it saves it for me. And then you have a page called the Lighthouse viewer that you literally drag that into your desktop, or from your desktop into the window, and it gives you the report. This Lighthouse viewer link is one you could save within your organization, and then those downloaded reports, if you need to send them over to different people in your team, you say, hey, grab this file, load it in this page, and this is what we're looking at on our website. So that is quite handy. Some of the other ones we talked about were web page test or GT metrics. These are third-party sites that we can take and enter a URL and then let it run. These are basically free. So if there are a lot of people using the site at once, It'll tell you where you are in line, and then once one of their system frees up, then it'll run the test for you. They do a bit more of a scoring here using page speed, which is the Google scoring. They're giving an A. Using an older Y-slow method, they're giving it a C. Gives us our page details, total page size, how many requests had to be made, and then it starts breaking things down for us across the different categories here. This is going to give me a little bit more of a breakdown into all kinds of checks. So what I would probably do is test from multiple places. I might run one of these tests and then save these results. I might use Lighthouse, run that test, save the results, and then just use that to see where do I need to make the effort in order to make some changes. Your waterfall, it's going to give you that breakdown of how long every single request that is being made, how long it takes. So you can see we actually start getting things moving relatively quickly. We're under 45 milliseconds, 454 milliseconds, so on and so forth. So 1.45 seconds gets us the load all the way over to here. So that's actually pretty quick. It's also a very simple page. Okay. If I'm looking at a WordPress website and I want to know how often is my database getting hit, because these front-end testing tools don't tell us much about the back-end building of my site. How many queries to my database am I making? CMSs, as we said, use databases to store content, and they're going to pull content out of those databases and assemble that in order to build out the page. If you have access to your database server and your database engineer, then you really have everything at your fingertips in order to determine that. There's logging that takes place that says when a request is made, what that query request was, and then when the results are returned, and you can run math across that and get all of your information. There's a plugin that WordPress uses that you can install in WordPress called QueryMonitor, and QueryMonitor reads all of that information. If I'm logged in to my website, if I'm logged in WordPress, I have my bar across the top here, then I can see all of this information that we're talking about. So I can see that if I am loading this page, these are all the queries that run in order for that to happen. If I have a page that is taking a particularly long time to load, I might look and see how many queries are running. There are 27 queries, 27 queue here, in order for that to happen. So that gives us some additional information on this. It also tells me more about the CMS and what's happening in here. But this is another tool that can be run to give you information on what's happening and might shed some light as to why your page is performing negatively if that's the case. Okay, let's move this and come back here. So learning from the results, now we've done some tests. I've run a couple of tests from different sources. I've got some information now. I see some areas that might be worth looking at. So what do I do? Where do I go to do this? How do I make these changes? So one of the things that we can do, if I have a lot of resources that are required, I need to find ways to combine those or reduce those. One of the tricks to this has been done for some time is to combine or concatenate CSS, and also to do the same for JavaScript. If you want to, you can, or if you can, you want to combine a lot of small images as well. This is called creating image sprites. So if I have, for example, if I have a wall of logos on my site, I might actually have my graphic design person or designer or freelancer or whatever put all of those logos into one image. Because then my browser is only loading one image and making one request as opposed to multiple requests and loading multiple images. So when possible, you want to try to do that. When your browser is loading CSS, JavaScript, or images, most of the time your browser caches that locally in your laptop, in your desktop, or whatever, because the next time that it has to request that file, if it can load it locally instead of making another request to the web server, it's going to do that. So if you can combine these files here, you could potentially boost that page load time, because now I'm loading it once and then I get to save it and I don't have to load it again for a while until it changes. If you're using WordPress, you've got a lot of tools at your disposal to do a lot of this work. I have a couple of links here. Atoptimize is a plugin that tries to get in and combine all of the CSS that you might be loading and do the same for JavaScript. You want to test this, obviously. With any performance plugin for a CMS, you definitely want to test it, because you could have some unintended consequences. You also want to look at your hosting provider. They may or may not do a lot of this functionality on their own already. And so if you go in and install a duplicate tool, you can cause some problems there too. These two come highly recommended from numerous sources. They are worth taking a look at. QueryMonitor, that was one we did a little bit of a demo there. This is an informative tool that lets me learn what goes into displaying a page. You know, all I'm doing is displaying a page from my CMS. Well, what has to happen for that page to be displayed? QueryMonitor gives me a lot of information on that. If you're using WooCommerce for an online store, WooCommerce has a page called the system status. This gives you tons of information about your server, about your CMS, about your server operating system. A lot of information that your development teams or your system engineers might need if there's problems with your site. QueryMonitor, this screenshot, you can see like what we saw earlier. This is information that your engineering team can take and look at, especially if your pages are loading slow. It'll flag the queries that could be causing that, and you can figure out ways of improving those. The status report that we talked about here, this is an example of what you might see. There are actually pages of information below this. It goes into a lot of detail, but we can see just in one screen, what version of WooCommerce am I running? What version of WordPress am I running? How much memory does WordPress have to run? That's very informative if I get pages that time out, or I'm uploading images and it just stops working. Tells me the server information. You can see Apache down there. So using this with WooCommerce, you can take this report, print a screenshot of it or print it out, and then really have a lot of good details there. Now let's talk about images. We hinted at the next gen image formats, but not even getting into that level of cutting edge. Images, especially in a CMS such as WordPress, can be an area causing a lot of trouble that you just don't realize off the bat. When you take an image, one image, let's say you have an image that's right out of your camera, whether it's an iPhone or a Canon or whatever. You've got an image that you've downloaded to your computer. You didn't do anything to it. You didn't crop it, nothing. You just took that image. You love that image. You want that image on your website. If I upload that image into WordPress, I am getting 4 copies of that image saved in my media library I'm only going to see one of them, but on the server in my media library, I'm getting 4 copies of that. I'm getting the original, I'm getting the thumbnail, I'm getting the medium, and I'm getting the large. WordPress by default includes thumbnail, medium, and large copies of images in the settings for media right off the bat. That's not a bad thing. That's a great thing, because then when I insert an image into content, I can select the appropriately sized one in order to not just load that large, massive image every single time, especially if I just need a small thumbnail on my blog page or something. You know, I'm not going to load the massive image. In my content, I want the massive image because then I get to show the big image. But WordPress is giving us this way to create these smaller copies of images so that I have the right sized one for my needs. If I have a feature-rich theme or a set of plugins for media management or galleries or sliders, those might introduce new sizes. So now, not only am I getting the original 3 copies of every image, but every other size that is defined in my theme or in my plugin, I'm adding those copies to the system as well. This is where things can go really wonky really fast if you're not careful. You can drag and drop images into WordPress. I have seen people take a folder of 50 images, drag them into the WordPress media library, and then wonder why their site crashed. Because their themes and their plugins had, at one point, we had a site that had 37 different image sizes defined. So every image size that is getting made, WordPress is processing that image times 37 times every image being uploaded at once. This is not a good thing. So you want to be knowledgeable of the sizes that are being defined and the usage of images, because you may have to do some customization or some work in order to prevent that from causing problems with your web server. What can you do with that? You can optimize your images before they even get to the web server. On the Mac, there is a handy tool called Image Optim. This is a drag and drop image that I can take a folder of images, drag it to this tool, and it runs compression across it. Resaves the images, and I can see noticeable improvements in file size without getting degradation of image quality. Now I can just simply upload smaller images. There's a plugin called Resmush It that you can install in your media library. And as you're adding images to your media library, it is doing the same thing. There's also a service called EWWW Image Optimizer Cloud. It has a WordPress plugin that is highly thought of. This does require, I believe, a paid account, but if this is an issue for you, this can be something that helps mitigate this problem. What these don't do is these don't eliminate or bypass the sizing that has to happen. That is purely done just by reducing the server queries that have to happen. So you could reduce the you could get into your theme code and look for where you're defining those image sizes, and do you need all that? Do you need that done? Get rid of that if you can. One thing you can do is just completely bypass WordPress's media sizing. This does require some custom code. It does require additional software, but there's open source software such as Thumbore. This was a solution that we use with a website. WordPress does nothing. All it does is upload and add the image to the media library. We told WordPress, don't make any image sizes, don't resize a thing, just keep the originals in there. And then on the front end, this Thumbore service just sits there and says, oh, you want to see these images on a page? Cool. It creates them on its server on demand and then caches them. So WordPress has nothing to do with image sizing. That took a lot of performance hits off of the web server. So that's a bit more of an advanced step, but it's just an example of the range of options you can use when you're dealing with media. I mentioned that Thumbore has caching. WordPress can work well with caching as well. If you have a good managed WordPress host, I believe every single one of the managed WordPress hosting providers out there has some level of caching that they provide, as well as a content distribution network, in order to spread the load from a single web server to multiple servers, so that you have less of a hit on your web server, and so that people can load content from the cloud, basically, so that it doesn't have to all come from one place. If a good managed WordPress host is not something that you can budget for, just doesn't make sense at the moment, you already have something in place that you're invested in, then you can look at individual services to replace this caching feature or do your own. Cloudflare is certainly a service you can look at using. There are free and paid plans for that. Let it sort of serve up the static copies of your pages as opposed to your web server. Let it put its CDN into play so that images and CSS can get distributed. You can look at a service or a plugin such as WP Rocket. You can also look at a plugin such as WP Supercache. WP Supercache creates static copies of all your pages and serves those instead of the database-driven ones. WP Rocket gives you all kinds of features that you can get in and tweak just to set the service up the way you need. We mentioned managed WordPress hosting. Honestly, a hosting change can be one of the quickest fixes that you can put into place. Bang for buck, this can give you some of the greatest impact on performance than a lot of the work that you would otherwise need to do. But considerations that you have in there is you want to tailor your hosting to your website's needs. You do kind of get what you pay for. You don't want to go all out and get super duper high powered dedicated server enterprise plan if you don't need it. But don't try to pinch your pennies here. This is really, over the long term, one of the better things you can do. And then my last question on this slide is the question you want to ask yourself. Do you want to be running a website, or do you want to run a business that uses a website? The latter is where you'll probably make more money and probably have more enjoyment, where your website is the tool that works for you. Is bigger, more expensive hosting the answer to this whole presentation and to this whole question about website performance? Yeah, it depends is a perfectly good answer. Better hardware does not fix bad code. Better hardware does not fix poorly configured websites. It just runs them faster, or it crashes them faster. So you're not just going to throw money at big hosting in order and have it fix all your problems. It can help, but it's not going to be the big solution there. I mentioned earlier working with all kinds of sites. This presentation deals with things that the whole gamut of websites deal with, whether it's big media companies, global enterprise, the convenience store down the street that has a website. It doesn't matter. What are some of the differences, though? How do they sort of compare? Well, your small business may not have an in-house development team. Enterprise may not have that as well. Enterprise may put their budget dollars towards the business and not so much in the website. So they're going to contract out to a freelancer or to a firm. Small business, 9 times out of 10, doesn't have an in-house team, so they're going to contract out to freelancers or a development team as well. Budget constraints can be a big factor with small business. Budget's less of an issue with enterprise, but you've got budget cycles and you have a lot of overhead on budget, so it's definitely a factor. Small business may rely more on out-of-the-box solutions or plugins for CMSs as opposed to custom code. With the enterprise, you're more likely to have custom development. You're going to have code audits. You're going to have more security layers and checks on code and clearance of code that has to go into the site. They're not just going to load something off the shelf. You're going to have bigger, better infrastructure with enterprise in most cases. They may have their own in-house hosting. They may have dedicated teams at hosting providers that provide the hardware and keep the hardware running for them. You're going to have upgrade paths with a lot of enterprise sites. So they have a 12, 18, 24-month calendar at play with specified deployment times. You're going to have regular maintenance and audits performed. You're not necessarily going to have all that with small business. It simply requires considerably more budget. But this is this might give you a bit of a look into what does this look like across this business spectrum. Okay, we're in the links, tools, and resources section here as we kind of get close to winding down. We've got links to all of the different tools that we've looked at: Google Lighthouse, web page tests, Pingdom, QueryMonitor, and the WooCommerce system status. Some of the tools we talked about: Optimize, WP Rocket, WP Supercache. You got links to there. EWW Image Optimize, Resmush It, Image Optim. And now we get into our Q&A. Rebecca, do you want to take that back over?
I sure do. Thanks so much, Pat. And thanks everybody for dropping in some questions. I believe we're going to have time for more than what's already come through. So if you're still, kind of thinking through what Pat had to say and things are in your mind, just drop them into the Q&A and we'll make sure we cover them. So Pat, while you take a drink, I'm going to scan through some of these and let you know what the questions are. It's nice to see familiar names that I know of on this list. Thank you all for joining us. Okay, so the first question we have is from Jay, and he said, Google themselves aims for 0.5 second server response times for their own websites. Studies at, I can't even pronounce that, Akomi claim 2 seconds as the threshold for e-commerce site accessibility. Any comments on that? Confirmations, disputes?
Yeah, not really going to dispute it. That's probably Akamai. If you were pronouncing that, I believe that's Akamai. And yeah, if Akamai is giving us that information, then we know the bar is shifting some. I think at some point we're going to see a law of diminishing returns come into play. We're not all Google. We all don't run our own global networks of hardware where we can literally control the pipes. But you definitely want to try to make these things load as fast as you can.
And I think what we need to do as marketers, webmasters, is think of the reason why Google's pushing this so much. We know that Google has had a really dominant force in most of the world, but then there's certain section of the world in third world countries that are just now starting to come online, right? They're just now starting to embrace and use the internet, and Google knows that these new users are future revenue for them. They have very limited access to desktops, and most all of their activity is over mobile. They have expensive data plans and not great, access to speed, high performance speed. So for them to be able to efficiently use the web, they need to have websites fast and with, solid performance and speed. And,
Yes.
that is Google's future market share and its future revenue. So Google's doing everything it can to prepare and to meet their expectations and make sure they have a positive user experience. And, performance is a lot about data and numbers and things like that. But I strongly believe in when you're trying to do things, at least for SEO perspective and with Google, always try to remember why Google's doing what it's doing, and that kind of helps just level set a lot of things.
Well,
okay, so as a tool,
the other part of that is just because Google's looking at the emerging world, that doesn't mean you can't either.
Yes.
You're talking about literal continents worth of eyeballs for your web pages. We are talking about emerging Wild West markets here. The bandwidth in these areas is not great. This is why Google's mobile performance is such an emphasis. It's not about, oh, I want to make Google happy. It's, can I get billions of eyeballs on my web page? If I'm making my web page for the Faculty Network Lounge, I'm not making my web page reachable to the Indian subcontinent, to the continent of Africa, to the back part of China, where there are millions and billions of people who are getting online, who are on the web, and who are using mobile devices for most of their browsing. You are writing them off if you're not paying attention to your performance.
I think the same is true for accessibility. You know, we've
Yes.
ignored accessibility for a really long time as, you know, not everyone, but I know that a lot of us in like the WordPress community and web development just haven't paid as much attention as we need to accessibility, and we are truly not serving all of the users when we do that. And Google's
Yeah.
putting more and more emphasis on that, which is why we just did that webinar with Carrie Dills, because you know, they're putting emphasis on it. And just like they started to put emphasis on speed and it became part of the algorithm, you can bet accessibility will be too. So
They
when
are.
you kind of see those things coming and Google continuously pushing that information and that you know, the data and the suggestions to you, you need to take note, because it will be eventually something that's required and not just a nice to have, kind of like an SSL.
Exactly.
Your website. I just posted a link inside the chat box for everyone. Jay provided it. It's for Google Lighthouse and it's the web version. So I just wanted to make sure that we got that over to everybody.
Great.
And he said that runs in any browser, not just Chrome. Jay's a good sidekick. I got to tell you, Jay. So Claudia asked, how can we compare those different tools if we get different results? And then she said, I think he just answered it. So Pat, do you have anything to add that, or do you feel like that we covered all of that in the slides and your prior comments?
What I'll reiterate that you know, you do want to source it. It's kind of like shopping your car out to different mechanics. You know, get second quotes and then take those results and see what they tell you.
Here's something I just want to say as I'm looking at the names in this that are providing questions, and it does my heart good as a marketer to see names of people who I know are not genuinely super technical. You know, they're not, I know like there's people in this webinar and who have submitted questions that are not coders, they're not programmers, yet they're interested in SEO and making sure that they're doing the best for their website and put that, you know, that step forward in the best possible manner. And I love that you're on this webinar. I love that you're paying attention to performance and optimization and that you're asking questions. It's what we need to do as marketers and website developers, because it provides a holistic experience and we're not just focused on the written word or keyword or, you know, what the design looks like. It's more cohesive and more holistic. And I think that the more that we do that, the better off we have with performance, conversions, and everything else. So kudos to you all. Okay, so this question comes from Katie. The scores from these different tests seem to vary quite a bit. Is there one that's more of a gold standard, and should we focus on the recommendations of one more than the standard score or grade?
You want to focus not so much on the scoring. The scoring is an arbitrary means of aggregating the results and trying to give you sort of a digestible take on it. What you want to look at are the performance, the breakdown in the performance, you know, the times required for different things to happen, the numbers behind that. That's where your actionable information is. So if you get a 100 on your score, that's great, but that's completely arbitrary. You want to look at how many milliseconds until my first contentful paint. What's my time to first byte? How many assets had to load that were blocking the rendering of the page? That's what you want to pull out of there. And all of these different tools are going to give you that presented in a slightly different way, but that's what you want to take your highlighter to, circle, and then go work on. Not just because it says you get 100 or an A or a C or anything like that.
I've noticed that when using certain tools like Pingdom, and I'm looking at the scores, and a website can feel very fast as a user, like the human, and have a poor grade, and then you can put in a website that is very slow for the human and it gets a good grade. It drives me crazy. So I mean, like, you know, you have to take some of this stuff with a grain of salt for sure.
Sure.
Okay, so the next question is a really meaty one. It says server response time is often an issue for me with good infrastructure. For example, a DigitalOcean VPS running a single site, 2 gig RAM, patchy, flattened to HTML by WP super cache, and then those files cached on Cloudflare CDN. What could I potentially do about this?
Your time to first byte is low. Unfortunately, I think in some cases, hosting providers tend to have a bit more latency on that, and there's not much you can do about that, other than sit and hammer away at their support teams to figure out what the heck's going on. The other thing you can do is you can look at, even though you may have flat static cache files being made, if in your head you're still loading 30 different external files, you may, all of that has to be sort of gathered and put into place before the page starts to render, and so that can slow your time to first byte down as well. That is where you want to look and see how much can I reduce out of what's getting, what my dependencies are, in order for it to be to start loading. So that you may have more control over, but you may reach a point where your time to first byte is what it is, just because that's what the host has. You may have to find a more, a host that gives you a bit more emphasis on that, which may impact your budget to some degree. I'm honestly not sure.
One thing I would suggest, so if you've got a host that you feel is not performing as it should, there are hosting accounts that will give you a free account that will allow you to copy over your website and test it there to see how it performs. I know Liquid Web will do that. They've done that with small and large accounts for clients that I've had. And when the client transferred the website over, even just just the copy of it, right, to do some testing on that kind of staging environment and that free account they set up for them, they could see a measurable difference. And so, which was a great indication that, okay, so I have done a lot of good things on my own, but fundamentally my host has issues, and by moving hosts, I have, I'm definitely making significant progress with performance. So if you do suspect that your host is not up to par, that's one great way of figuring out whether that may be an option or not. Pat, you may have disagreements with that or agreements, but I just know from the couple of clients that I've seen them do that with, there was a measurable difference.
Yeah, I mean, make your hosting provider work for you as much as you can. Throw up a very simple HTML file and just see how long it takes to load the HTML file from one provider to the other.
Ooh, that's a good idea too.
You're not loading any JavaScript, you're not loading any CSS, you're not loading any images, you're just loading an HTML file. And then what's my time to first byte from one provider to the other just for that? Because then there is no dependency, it's just a file. So why is it taking long from one versus the other?
Very good. Okay, so next question, how to best deal with plugins that introduce render blocks?
The easy answer that's not the pleasant one is don't use them or write them. I mean, there's not a magic bullet there. That's where you have to measure cost. You have to do some cost benefit on what using those plugins in those configurations does for you. Some things you may have to end up living with because it's something you just can't work without. The alternative is you end up rewriting it on your own, but that has its own overhead in terms of development resources.
Okay, so next question, image Optum is very good, but not quite as good as JPEGs or JPEG Mini. Maybe that's more of a statement as opposed to a question.
Yeah, JPEG and JPEG Mini are image formats. Image Optum is a tool that I've used to compress JPEGs and PNGs. Well, the advantage of using Image Optum is that I can still use the common image formats like JPEG and PNGs, but get smaller file sizes for those images. Using the newer formats that are out there, it just depends on the browser suite you have to support. If you don't need to support older browsers, start converting over to the newer image formats. We're looking at that with some clients right now at CrowdFavorite, where they've relied on larger, older file sizes, and we're now looking at converting a lot of those over to the newer JPEG formats.
Okay, so the next one's a great question. It's from Annie, and Annie asks, what can I say to convince my clients to change servers? His website is on, I don't even want to say this, the web host, because I feel bad. His website's on an existing web host, and it's extremely slow. Do you have any specific technical arguments other than the PHP version? So it's shared hosting that the client's on. She's having trouble trying to convince them to move off. What can she kind of present to help with that argument and that encouragement to move to a more high quality host?
Well, you're looking at total cost of ownership over a period of time is one case I would probably make. If you can frame that question of do you want to be working on your website or have your website work for you, you want to try to, that's a position that I've taken with people and trying to convince them to switch over to better hosting. Other arguments would be data over time, and that just requires running some tests and saving those tests and looking at, here's an instance where we had an issue with the host. Here's another instance where we had an issue with the host. Here's another instance. MySQL went down because something else on the server was using its resources and it wasn't you. We ended up paying for it because the site went down. You're just going to have to record that information and present that information.
I think another one is conversions. If your client is using the website for lead gen or for e-commerce, those humans are only going to wait so long, right? And if performance hampers conversions, and you need to remind your client of that. Okay, so another question from Katie: among the common recommendations, which ones are low-hanging fruit or the biggest ROI?
Low-hanging fruit, the biggest ROI. Low-hanging fruit, biggest ROI would probably be things like combining your CSS files, using a tool to minify and concatenate those, where you're reducing the number of scripts. Anytime you do that type of work, though, you have to be cognizant of the next time you add a plugin to the CMS, for instance, because it may introduce new CSS, new JavaScript. Another low-hanging fruit could be going from El Cheapo shared hosting to slightly more expensive managed hosting. Managed hosting that provides things like caching, provides things like CDN, provides things like security checks, those types of things, just for the comfort and the assuredness of knowing that that's being taken care of, that there's value in that. Other things would be your image optimization. That one is one that can be done quite easily with the different tools and plugins. So that if your image was, 1,000 kilobytes when you uploaded, after being compressed and optimized, it's, 400 kilobytes. That's a very much click and forget kind of thing.
But while we're talking about code optimization and those kind of checks and balances, when the email comes out an hour after the recording stops, there is an offer in there from SEMrush, who does website audits, and they will give you some data on your code and how performance driven is your code. They actually have reached out to me a couple of times, and they're like, hey, we know you do webinars. Can we offer anything to your people? And I'm like, sure, we always take free offers. So what the link is in the email that's coming out is a free month of their pro package, which would allow you to run website audits on a number of different sites and really get specifics on where what could be like some low-hanging fruit that you can hit. It is coming out in the email. It's good until tomorrow night. So if you're interested in that at all, take advantage of it. It's nice because it's a free 30 days of trial. So you could run the audit, see some things that are wrong, make some tweaks, rerun the audit, and see if you're making progress. I love to use that for websites audits when I've been doing those in the past, because it does, like for me and from a non-programmer standpoint of view, it gives me heads up on things I wouldn't know otherwise. So one question, which Pat, you were providing a great segue into, do you have any recommendations for a fast hosting provider? I now use a economical managed WordPress hosting company, and it just doesn't seem to be an area of focus for them. I know I love Liquid Web. I know WP Engine's great as well. Who are some of your favorites?
So we at Crowd Favorite, we work with several providers that are out there, mostly in the managed WordPress space, because we tend to work with the larger site needs. WP Engine and Pagely are both great hosts that we have used because they have a lot of performance characteristics that our clients need. If I have a friend who has her just sort of self-run design business, and she is looking at either SiteGround for one of their managed WordPress plans or the GoDaddy managed WordPress hosting, both of which are great as well. What I would look for if I'm looking to move over to a host is not just maybe the raw speed, but I would also look at, do I get SSL when I have to move to a new host? Is there a migration tool that can make my site migration easy so that I'm not wasting a day moving a lot of files and I forget those 3 images or whatever? I would look at how, what is it managed and what does managed mean? Do I have server-side caching available? So those are some characteristics that I would use in comparing the different hosting providers that are out there. If I were looking for just straight raw speed when it comes to serving, I would probably look at Google Cloud or AWS. But there's both a cost involved in that, just from straight budget perspective, as well as DevOps and systems administration. You got to have somebody set it up and run it for you.
In other words, people like me cannot just sign up and run that on their own.
Well, it's getting better with different tools like, I'm serious, with tools like Server Pilot, and I believe there's another dashboard style tool that are out there. It makes it a lot easier for you to create an AWS account, come over here and create a Server Pilot account, and then with Server Pilot, have it do all the configuration for you and give you the connection information, and before you know it, you're running your website in the cloud. Not necessarily at a managed provider. You still have to do your updates. You still have to set up caching. You have to do those other things, but you're sitting up there on cloud hardware.
Okay, so our next question comes from Claudia, and Claudia has been an SEO student of mine, and I love her question because of this. She said, from Lighthouse, I have a 1 for performance and a 91 for SEO. I'm assuming I really need to focus on my website now. Thoughts? And just to give you some background, Pat, her website that she has is not her personal website. It's actually for an organization that is, worldwide recognized organization, and it's got a good, decent sized site. That's not huge, but it's got a decent sized site, and it will be getting used by humans across the entire world.
If I see something like that, the first thing I'm going to ask is, are you logged in when you're running that test? Or are you just using the browser tool on its own? If you're logged in and you're running that test, you're probably loading a lot of things that the average user isn't going to see. Administrative scripts, non-cached version of CSS or JavaScript, perhaps, things like that. Additional scripts to render admin bars, etc. So you're going to get a completely different set of numbers than if you go into either a totally different browser or a totally different, incognito mode in another browser kind of thing, and then run the test.
Okay, so she just added a note that says, I'm not logged in.
If you're getting a performance of 1, then yes, that to me is going to be a red flag. The next thing is I'm going to go down and look at what the different impact, the breakdown is. Why is it giving me that score? Is my time to first byte just horrid? Do I have massive mega images that are loading? Things like that. And just start to look and see what it's telling me.
I know Claudia will have to be able to, will be forced to go to like her in-house IT department and kind of approach them. So she's the non-technical person that knows SEO, that's going to the, the in-house IT guys that know performance and know technology, right? And kind of telling them our performance stinks. What can we do?
Run the Lighthouse report a couple of times during the day. Save the results from each one, and then you can use the Lighthouse viewer with your in-house tech team and go, here are 4 different tests I ran at different times of the day of the home page. Why is our score looking like this? Because then you're arming yourself with data, and you're not, anytime somebody non-technical is going to go to the tech team, there's going to be sort of a natural confrontation that happens. So you can minimize that by saying, hey, I've noticed this problem here. Let me, here's what I've got. How can we work on this? And just take that proactive forward approach.
All right, excellent. So our next question is, any opinions on Amazon CloudFront versus Cloudflare for CDN?
I think both are great. I've got sites on both. I think Amazon's going to give you a bit more of the Amazon is definitely going to be more in the enterprise grade of CDN. Cloudflare less so, but I have run big sites behind both and had great performance.
Okay, so the next question is just a funny one. Annie, you correct me up. So it says, if a website is installed on a server with cPanel instead of a server where WP is installed directly on the server, is there a difference of performance? And it's with one of the hosts that I won't mention.
Yeah. No worries.
Trying to protect people.
That is a common question, and it's a good one, because the answer is no, assuming that the setup is done exactly the same. When you're using one of the installers off of a cPanel, if it is creating the MySQL database and downloading the latest version of WordPress, setting it up and running you through the scripts to create your accounts, there should be no difference there. What's going to impact that is it installing anything alongside WordPress, little third-party marketed plugins or other helper tools, air quotes, things like that. If you see plugins in there that you didn't want that are active, get rid of them, and then you'll sort of be back to the same spot you were just by setting it up on your own.
Okay, excellent. So just so you know, Pat, Claudia said, thank you so much for that information.
Good.
Yeah, so the next question is in regards to Beaver Builder. It's from my friend Cheryl. She'd like to know, she says, Beaver Builder adds layers and it makes it hard to optimize, but her clients love it. Is there any suggestions on how to balance that?
Yes. With Beaver Builder, you definitely want to test the site performance in a totally separate window from where you yourself are working, because that tool in particular gives you a different experience whether you're logged in or not. When you are not logged in, you are getting the cached, minified version of CSS and JavaScript that the page builder creates for every page that's managed by it. One of the great things about Beaver Builder is that it does create static CSS and JavaScript for every page that's rendered, so that you're not having to dynamically create that every time. If you're logged in, you're not going to get that performance boost. You're going to get the uncompressed, the unminified, and it's probably going to feel clunky if it's a big page. But over in a separate browser, not logged in, you might be getting a pretty snappy little page. So do your test there and understand the difference between the two. Beyond that, you're going to want to look at whether or not the cache is being cleared or recreated regularly. If it's a highly active page builder site and you've got 5 different people in Beaver Builder going nuts, you can't just slap their hands and take the mouse away from them. People are going to want to get in and do their work. But what can happen is the cache could not be cleared correctly because there's just too much going on. There is a GitHub repository that one of the devs over at Beaver Builder has set up called the Beaver Builder Cache Helper, I think it's called. It's not in the WordPress repo, it's a GitHub repo. It's a plugin that you can install that all it does is when templates are updated, if plugins are updated, if WP Engine or Pagely, if one of these other managed hosting providers has the cache clear, it clears Beaver Builder's cache too and rebuilds a fresh copy. That has, I've seen that stabilize the performance of a site to some degree. Didn't really speed it up, but it kept it from getting crappy.
Okay, so Jay gave some feedback for Katie's question on the low-hanging fruit. He said his opinion for the low-hanging fruit, image optimizations, minification, flattening PHP with caching plugins. And then Jay also said server pilot with DigitalOcean for the win.
That is a great combination. I don't know that I would measure the raw speed against something like AWS or Google Cloud, but I've got some sites on DigitalOcean with server pilot, and it's nice. I moved off of some other hosting providers to that from a couple of my personal sites.
Okay, so Deb says she's late to the party, but she's got a question about testing in the incognito browser. Is that preferable?
For the front end page, for the in-browser testing, yes. If you're running Lighthouse inside of Chrome, do it in an incognito mode so that you're not logged in, you're not caching things, you're just working off of a straight vanilla browser at that point.
Claudia, take a note of that as you're doing your 4 tests for your IT department. Okay, so a couple more questions. Your opinion on Jetpack as far as an impact on performance. And Jay's asking because it's a client favorite.
Yeah.
Oh, Pat's laughing. That can't be good.
It's the sword that cuts both ways. With Jetpack, I can offload images and image rendering and all of that to WordPress.com. But at the same time, holy cow, am I loading a lot of crap in my site that I just don't need. I have not installed or run Jetpack on an enterprise site, if that has any bearing to it, but I have used it personally for some of the features because it just worked. What I don't like about Jetpack is stop putting new crap into my site whenever you update it. So that right there causes me performance issues because, wait a minute, I didn't turn this setting on. Why is this setting loaded? I don't want emojis. Where did that come from?
I hate when hosts do that with plugins too.
Yeah. And so it's like any other plugin that you update, you have a potential for new things happening. But because Jetpack has become more of a plug-in platform than anything else, it's more likely to cause new things to be loaded that I didn't ask to be loaded.
Okay, so this is a question from Claudia. She's like, it's my last question, I promise. And it says, I just ran another audit in Lighthouse from the homepage, and now she got a 0 for performance and 100 for SEO. With different points and metrics. Should she run this on different pages? And Claudia, I will tell you just because I know what site you have, I know your homepage is super image heavy with like those big scrolling images. So definitely when you're running tests, make sure that you are doing it on like the homepage and then some interior pages that don't have all those images. So at least you're going to get some different metrics that will be helpful for your IT department. That was my opinion, but I'm surely not the professional in performance. So Pat, what would you say?
Well, I would flip all the switches the same way. Am I testing desktop or am I testing mobile? Am I testing throttled or am I testing not throttled? Run the same test with the same parameters at different times a day on different pages. Don't change the switches one way for your home page, change the switches another way for an inside page. You're going to get different results just from doing that. Also, it's kind of like Google Analytics. Don't sit there and watch it every 5 minutes. You're not going to be happy. Run it at 3 or 4 times a day and then walk away from it. And that's it. Run it on a Monday, walk away from it. Run it on a Sunday night, walk away from it. Because you're in the time, just in the time window that we've been talking, it's very likely you're going to get inaccurate or less than accurate responses because not that much time has simply passed. So.
Okay, so for everyone that is still on, my other favorite sidekick, Cheryl, posted the GitHub URL that Pat mentioned, so I just put it into the chat box so it's there for whoever would like it.
That is a very handy tool.
Yep. Okay, so Gina said, how big of a WooCommerce site must be to put it on Cloudflare? Man, I have a hard time saying that. Or does it depend on traffic?
It's all about traffic. How active is your My Account pages? How active are your checkouts? What's your checkouts per minute or add to carts per minute? That type of thing. The other thing is, if you're talking about WooCommerce and you're talking about caching, you don't necessarily want to cache everything for WooCommerce because your carts and your add to carts and your checkouts, that's all dynamic. If you cache it, people are going to want to know where that thing is that they just clicked and why isn't it showing up in their cart. So you can be too aggressive with caching when it comes to e-commerce. So that's where a little bit more thinking, a little work with your hosting provider, things like that. You want to be able to cache some things and not cache others.
All right, well, that was our last question. And Pat, I'm not sure if as a panelist you can see the questions, but there is a whole bunch of love in the questions for you with just tons of thanks.
No,
and
I can't see that, but that's great to know.
Yes. So what is your handle on Twitter?
My handle on Twitter is Pat_Ramsey.
Excellent. And then so if you enjoyed today's webinar, or if you're listening to the recording, hit Pat up on Twitter and let him know that he was helpful, because we all put lots of time and effort into our slides and thought into what we're going to present, and then time to execute. And Pat's doing this free of charge because he likes the community. So show him some love. And if you are an enterprise level client and you would like help with performance and optimization, you can head on over to crowdfavorite.com to submit an inquiry into his firm. They are excellent. I have sent some web savvy clients over there that they definitely have helped out with performance and optimization, and my clients were very thankful for their efforts. Anything else before we close today, Pat?
No, thank you everybody for coming on. This was a lot of fun, and those were some excellent questions.
Okay, great. We have a webinar coming up. I think next week already for Bing Webmaster Tools, and I will be having webinars next year still. I know many of you know that I did accept a position with the Imagine team as the Vice President of Digital Marketing Services, but do not think webinars and education are going away. It is just part of who I am, and we are going to continue to do them. So have
awesome.
no fear if you had heard that news and questioned it, because I know I did receive emails from people.
Yep. Congratulations, by the way, Rebecca. Thanks.
It's been a great
very lucky to have you. Yep. That's going to be fun.
Yep, that's exactly what it is. You know, you do something for so long, and I've been running Web Savvy for 9 years, and why I love it, and I love doing the SEO. It is definitely nice to have a change, to have a team of both SEO and pay-per-click, you know, employees that are like already wonderful, and I can continue to grow that. And so that's been a lot of fun. But we will have webinars through the Imagine team, and we're going to continue to do SEO education. And you might even find some on pay-per-click coming from me and my team, now that I have some superstars that can help prep some slides and give some wonderful information. So with that said, we'll see you next week for the next webinar, and give a shout out to Pat. Thanks so much.